America today is what Rome was yesterday. America is the world's sole superpower, and it achieved such a position by using the geopolitical shifting sands to cement its place as the world's superpower by creating a global military force, a global world trade network, and a global monetary order. I'm your host, Ebube Okoli. In this episode of Up Close and Center, we will explore the blueprint for how America became the world's sole superpower and created our planet's current world order, and how African nations can apply this blueprint to achieve such a status. Please like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification button so that you'll be notified every time new content becomes available. Many historians consider World War II to be Europe's most destructive war ever. This war claimed between 35 and 60 million lives. But the greatest impact was the destruction of most pre-war European powers. With Europe destroyed, America saw this as an opportunity to take the reins of world leadership. At first, it was unclear as to whether Russia or the United States would become the world's next superpower. However, the one thing that was clear was the fact that Europe was either going to come under Soviet occupation or come under indirect American control. America first began setting up the world's new framework in a small American town called Bretton Woods in the state of New Hampshire. In this town, America gathered 44 nations to negotiate a new set of rules and a new world order. A large part of America claiming world leadership involved three key steps. The first was completely overhauling the world's financial system. The second was creating a global military force. And the third was crafting a system of world trade. Now, when it comes to the financial system that America set up, one has to remember that prior to the agreements at Bretton Woods, most countries used the gold standard. However, after World War II, most European nations didn't have enough gold to have workable currencies, as all currencies had to be backed by gold. For America, this simply wasn't the case. After the war, America held 75% of the world's gold. Therefore, America was one of the only nations with enough gold to have a workable currency. And without a workable currency, nations can't have a workable economy. And without an economy, there is no nation. Under this agreement, the United States dollar was pegged to gold at a fixed rate, while all other currencies would then be pegged to the US dollar. What this meant in practical terms is that one could theoretically take Naira from the central bank in Abuja, then exchange that Naira for US dollars, and from there, exchange those US dollars for their value in gold. Consequently, countries' currencies had value not because they could be exchanged for gold directly, as was the case prior, but countries' currencies had value because they could be exchanged for US dollars. With this move, the world moved away from having a direct gold standard and moved to a standard where the dollar was the world's new gold. America soon emerged as the universal bank of the world. After establishing the dollar as the world's currency, America then handpicked certain nations to be designated as allies, and America set out to rebuild nations to serve this purpose. The next item on America's agenda was to float several institutions. These institutions are known today as the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, and the World Bank. These institutions were established to help execute the framework for America's new world order. Another key move America made in crafting this world order was to use their navy in ensuring deep-sea trade among nations. Thus, the U.S. Navy's dominance of the world's oceans made it an indispensable foreign policy tool as a guarantor of global trade, as 90% of the world's trade is done by sea. The monetary components and the security components of the system allowed for global trade to flourish. Prior to the Bretton Woods system being implemented, if nations wanted to trade with other nations over long distances, they would have to have the capability to ensure end-to-end security from port of origin to the port of destination. What this meant in essence is that, take for example Nigeria. Nigeria's main export is crude oil from the Niger Delta region. Oil is extracted from this region and then shipped all over the world. Prior to the Bretton Woods system being implemented, if, for example, Nigeria wanted to sell oil to India, it would have to have a powerful enough navy to escort the merchant vessels from Port Harcourt all the way to India and back. Thus, If Nigeria didn't have sufficient naval power, its trade was limited to how far it could militarily project. With the Bretton Woods system, states now had the option to trade among nations far and away without the constraints of maintaining large naval fleets. Since America had essentially become the world's bank and now guaranteed world trade, the third prong of the American system involved creating a multinational military force. Accordingly, NATO emerged as that very institution. NATO was essential in that it became the hard power component of the Bretton Woods system. A note to remember is that all of the components of the American system worked together. This trilateral system ran smoothly until the 1970s when an unforeseen complication triggered what some described as the collapse of the monetary order, a key component of that very system. In 1971, concerned that the U.S. gold supply was no longer adequate to cover the number of dollars in circulation, President Richard M. Nixon devalued the U.S. dollar relative to gold. Being that the U.S. dollar was the global reserve currency, when the global community got word of the actions taking place by the Nixon administration, governments then began to demand gold for their ever-decreasing dollars at an unprecedented pace. By 1973, the run on the U.S. gold reserves had hurt the United States to such an extent that President Richard Nixon decided to decouple the value of the dollar from gold altogether. From 1973 onward, global currencies, once backed by the U.S. dollar, which was backed by gold, began to float. Many historians and analysts alike point to the U.S. dollar's decoupling from gold as the total collapse of the Bretton Woods system. However, this assertion is not truly accurate, as the other two components of the system still remain in place. Moreover, even if the monetary order of the system no longer exists, the security and trade arrangements from the system have all persisted to this day. As such, the system America set up is still the preeminent system world over. Furthermore, America still remains the world's superpower, as no other nation or group of nations have proposed a system as vast in scope or as practical in application as the American system. Therefore, the system may have flaws, but at present it's the only serious system of the last 80 years. So, what lessons can the African continent learn from the American example? In the context of our analysis, we will treat Africa as a singular entity, due to the fact that Africa has a better and faster chance of reaching world power status as a single, efficient entity rather than as individual nations. In regards to an African monetary order, the African Monetary Union, or AMU, has been proposed for the creation of an economic and monetary union for the countries making up the African Union. This union is to be administered by an African central bank. Such a union would create a new, unified currency, similar to the euro. The hypothetical currency is sometimes referred to as the Afro, or Afrique. The Abuja Treaty, an international agreement signed June 3, 1991, created the African Economic Community and called for an African central bank to follow by 2028. The plan is to establish an African economic community with a single currency by 2023. In regards to a Pan-African economic ecosystem, the African Economic Community, or AEC, is an organization of African nations established to create grounds for mutual economic development among the African states. The enumerated goals of the organization include the creation of free trade areas, customs unions, a single market, a central bank, and a common currency, thus establishing an economic and monetary union. Currently, there are multiple regional blocs in Africa, known as regional economic communities. These regional economic communities consist primarily of trade blocs and, in some cases, some political and military cooperation. Furthermore, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement created a trade area which includes most African nations. Outside of the World Trade Organization, this free trade area created by the agreement is the largest in the world in regards to number of participating countries. In regards to an African multinational military force, currently, there have been regional multinational military operations, particularly in West Africa through ECOWAS. However, Africa lacks an impactful, independent multinational military presence. If these outlined measures are pursued with integrity of purpose, We can see this century is vital for the African nations emerging from their 600-year slumber. When African nations speak of becoming superpowers or merging the African continent to become a superpower contender, we have to understand that in order to become a true superpower, the nation or conglomerate of nations also needs an accompanying system that other nations will see and adhere to, either voluntarily because it's in their nation's best interest, or alternatively because they have no choice. This concludes our broadcast of Up Close and Center. I'm your host, Ebube Okoli. Thank you for your time and your commitment to the continent.